Okay, we're going to get started a couple minutes early here with the live video. Again, if you have questions about an investigation or about some type of investigator resource, you can email the help desk. You see the address on the screen. help@activeintel.com is the address. We can put those on the screen. We have a couple questions already. Evan, we'll be getting to your question, and Sarmina, it looks like there's another one coming in right now, so we'll start with those. And then let's take a look here. Good. So our first question that we have from Evan has to do with an online scam where the question is, how do you get money back if you sent payment to a fake investment website? This is probably the most common type of investigative question that we're getting. There are thousands of fraudulent companies that put out a website with some type of fake investment. Usually it's sending money for a real estate investment. Maybe you're purchasing some type of a trust or a bond. And it turns out that there was no such underlying investment vehicle. There's nothing to the source of this. In investigating that type of a scam, the way we go about doing it is we start by identifying the party, the identity of the party behind the scam. Usually it's the name that's being used initially is fake. You know, they'll come up with a fake name. They may even have a fake phone number or email. But the first step is identifying who's behind it. You can track down IP addresses. If there's a phone number, you do a backtrace on the phone number. In most cases, even if the name is fake, the name and or the email, if you back search through different social media channels or even the IP headers of the email you received from that person, you can find the true identity. Another pathway that we'll use is by looking at the web presence accounts that have been created. It could be a website for that fake investment. The website will have a hosting account or a domain registrar account. They'll have to have either a phone number or an email with their domain registrar. Even if they have it behind an anonymous proxy, there'll be a requirement to have that information with the host. And that'll be the first source. Another source will be to backtrace any social media. Most of these scammers will have created either an Instagram or Facebook or some other social media, sometimes LinkedIn. Some of them are using Telegram through Twitter to communicate. And in those cases, there is an identity required. You have to put up a phone number or an email to get those accounts started. So that's the next thing we'll do, is to backtrace there. In most cases, these scammers operate more than one of these frauds. They may have one that's real estate fraud. They may have one that's an investment fraud. Some of them are Bitcoin, and that's the question that our next visitor, Sarmina, has about a Bitcoin scam. They'll operate more than one at the same time. And when that happens, they'll use the same contact information for the different scams. They might use a variation of the email. They might, have Joe Schmo 1, Joe Schmo 2, and you can backtrace those emails to find out which phone number was used to create them or if they're connected together. In many cases, the IP address that was used to create those emails are all the same IP address. So that'll be the first step, is identifying who actually is the person behind this. Once they've been identified, then we're going to cross-reference that person with legitimate companies. Sometimes these people have an actual company they're using to wash the funds through. Sometimes they have a physical address where they have an office. And most people, even if they're working from home or it's a residential location, there'll be a business address, because scammers very rarely want to use their physical address where they sleep at night for their own identity online. So when they're creating hosting accounts, when they're creating Stripe accounts to process payments, bank accounts for wire transfers, they're going to use a commercial address. And that's a good thing, because that commercial address is a place to start. Once that's been identified as the location, we can connect it from there to things like vehicles, a physical address for the individual, where they have their residence, and then you can positively identify who took the money and what else are they into. Most of these scammers have multiple operations going at the same time, and they may have assistants. They have a couple people running all these emails, sending email replies to the victims that are replying to their advertisements. Usually the advertisements start on social media. In most cases, our clients tell us they saw the ad the first time on Instagram, on Facebook. Sometimes it's a deal on OfferUp or Craigslist, and they send the money in. And after some period of time, the scam company goes ghost and they stop emailing you back or stop calling you back. So in the meantime, if you are suspicious of an operation that has scammed you, a couple things that you need to do immediately. First of all, make sure you're not in any kind of physical danger. And, if you have any kind of immediate, urgent danger or risk, you want to call 911 and get the police involved. But if it's financial, they're probably not going to do too much. They may not even take a police report unless there's some risk to your physical well-being. Don't necessarily blow your cover as a victim with the scammer. You want to keep that line of communication open as long as you can, because that may be a way to get more information from that scammer. You don't want to call them out that it's a fraud, because once you do, that may shut down even more communication. And by keeping it open, most of these scammers are cautious, but you may be able to get more details from them if you do the right kind of social engineering. Once they've been identified as an individual that is behind this operation, the next step is to look at what assets this person or company has. What bank accounts do they have? What vehicles do they have registered to them? Do they own real estate? Do they own corporations? Do they have any websites, trademarks, or other intellectual property? Because those are all things that you want to look at later when it comes time to asset recovery, to see what is the inventory of assets that can be garnished through a legal process. So that's going to be the next step. Once you identify who it is, what are their assets? As part of that process, make sure that you keep in mind that as investigators, we can provide a lot of resources for strategic, detective work, investigative work, but you may also need to keep in mind you may need legal advice. You want to make sure you're not doing anything illegal. You want to make sure if there's any court activity required that you're aware of what that is. As an investigator, we can tell you what other clients have done and kind of give you an idea of what legal activities we've observed in the past, but we're not attorneys. We can't give legal advice. So keep in mind, you may want to get legal advice from an attorney in addition to doing an investigation, either before or after. Once you've identified the person and what assets they may have, the next step is to look at what is going to be the method for garnishing those assets. Is it going to be a writ of garnishment? Is it going to be a judgment? Is it going to be a repossession of a vehicle, lien on a property? Once you've connected that fraud to a person and their assets, that's going to be the next step in recovering the assets, is showing your losses. And that's usually a legal process or a court process. and connecting them to assets that were transferred away from you and are now in the hands of that scammer. We'd like to look at asset recovery as not so much collecting money from a person. We look at it like that's your money that person or company has taken from you, and they just happen to be storing it for a period of time, right? It's your money. If it was a misrepresented scam, our position is it's your money. And that's the position that we recommend that attorneys use if they take legal action, that it's not necessarily trying to get money from somebody. It's your money that they happen to have their hands on in the moment. So a lot of this is going to be the same for the next question for Sarmina. We'll get to a Bitcoin scam, similar type of scam, but this had to do with Bitcoin. And after that, Jeffrey, your question is next. That has to do with asset recovery, which we covered a little bit, but we'll get more into it. But for Sarmina, your question is, can you recover Bitcoin if your account was entered by a scammer? A lot of times the scam for Bitcoin is the fraud company will approach a victim and have the victim allow them access to their Bitcoin account. And I don't know, why somebody would do this, but we hear this very, very frequently. We talk to a couple hundred people a day, and it's very common to hear that a victim has allowed access to their Bitcoin by a scammer for the purpose of an investment, and they're going to supposedly get more back at the end of this. And turns out, the account was wiped out, and then this person is nowhere to be seen. And with Bitcoin, it's kind of the same process. You find out who's behind it, even though Bitcoin is, is not transparent. It's, it's crypto, and there's no necessarily paper trail behind it. But there is a paper trail behind the communications, or the email you received, the phone call you received, websites, social media. It's the same thing. You want to find out who's behind it. And at some point, the scammers will normally convert that Bitcoin into currency, into cash, whether it's US currency or another denomination. And that is a footprint of an activity. So if you can demonstrate that this particular individual or company improperly converted your asset to their own asset, and then you can see that cash actually goes to that person, that's the first step, is identifying who it is. And some of it is recovering lost data. One of the things that comes up, and if we don't get a question on, I think we will, because somebody called during the week and they said they were going to join the conversation about recovering lost data. And the data that's on your phone, your mobile device, your computer, a lot of times can be recovered, so that even if it's deleted, the app is deleted, the other person deleted it, there's records of these communications that can be used to prove that an activity happened. So that's going to be part of that Bitcoin fraud investigation. So those kind of were the same. The online scam and the Bitcoin is usually a version of the online scam. In fact, in our YouTube channel, you'll see there was a video we put up a couple weeks ago where the FBI has identified that Bitcoin scam is the largest, fastest growing type of scam that consumers are falling prey to. There's people all over the place that are putting ads on Facebook and Instagram that they have some kind of Bitcoin deal. You give them so much Bitcoin, you get back 5 times that much in a month, and the money just disappears. So be very aware of that. I'm not saying that all Bitcoin is scam. There's obviously uses for cryptocurrency, but because of the nature that it's anonymous and there's no paper trail, that's very key to how a fraudster will describe an investment to you, because they really can't describe the investment because it's cryptocurrency, right? And that by its definition means that they don't have to tell you what's going on with it. They can just say it's Bitcoin and you'll get it back. They don't have to describe anything in detail. Unlike a real estate investment where they at least have to tell you the address of the property, and they show you the deed and they show you the mortgage, and you have to verify all the title information. Crypto, there is no title information, so you can very easily become a victim in that scenario. So keep that in mind. Next question from Jeffrey has to do with asset recovery. if you have a scenario where you want to recover assets, how does that work? And the way asset recovery works is you first look at the list of asset types. There are many asset categories. There's bank accounts, that's an asset. There are real estate holdings, deeds, mortgages. There are vehicles. There are other tangible assets, things like aircraft, boats, vessels, ATVs. Those are all assets. There are even intangible assets, such as intellectual property, websites, trademarks, patents, maybe corporate holdings. If somebody has a corporation, something LLC corporation, those are all assets. There's many categories of assets, and each one is searched separately. For example, when you search for real estate, that's searched at the county recorder's office. You're looking at deeds, you're looking at filed documents, and you can see who owns a property. It's kind of like a reverse title search. Instead of looking at who owns 12 Main Street, you're looking at a name and finding out what property that person owns. What are all the list of properties they own? For vehicles, it's the same thing. You're searching DMV records to find out what vehicles are titled in the name of your debtor or the person that you're collecting from. When it comes to bank accounts, this is where most clients have the first priority. They want to look at bank accounts. And here's how bank accounts work. A bank account search is done using a private sector resource. You can't just call the bank and ask them how much Joe Schmo has in the bank. They're not going to tell you. There's no database where you can just type in somebody's name and social security number and all their bank accounts pop up. It's not part of a credit report. Credit reports is exactly that. It's credit. It is debt instruments, loans, credit cards, mortgages, things that you owe money. It's not asset search. It's a credit report. So an asset search for bank accounts is done, and there's three public sector sources for this information that are legal. One is using the Swift code transaction system, and there's several sources for this, and this is how we do it when we do an asset search. One source through the Swift code will identify any Swift banking codes that were generated for a tax ID number, and it might be an account balance search, it might be ATM withdrawal, it might be any activity on that account is going to generate a Swift bank code that can be searched that will identify an account for a person. Another source is the check verification system. When you walk into Home Depot or Target, you're going to see on the checkout stand, if you want to pay by check, they have a company, Paychex or Checks Free or one of those verification companies that will verify your check so they don't take a bad check from you. That's another source. And the third source is the checking account authorization system, where when you go into a bank to open up a new checking account, before that bank will open the account, they're going to make sure that you're not a serial check bouncer. They can't just run a credit report, because remember we talked before, credit reports don't have anything to do with bank accounts, only loans and credit cards. So even if you bounce checks, that's not going to show up on your credit report. So there are several private companies that track if somebody is a bad check bouncer. And when you open up a new account, they're going to check into that. And every time you open an account, it'll create a record of that event. So to run a bank account search, you can run one or all three of those. We recommend running all three because they're not all the same. We have had many scenarios where we run a bank account search using one of the sources, and then when we run it on the other source, we find more accounts or less accounts. So if you need 100% accuracy, even running all three may not be 100%. There may be some obscure accounts that don't show up in all three of them. But for the most part, if you want to have high accuracy, you want to run all three. You don't want to run just one of them. So that's how you'd run a bank account search. And then corporate records, those are checked through Secretary of State in the state where the corporation exists, and it'll show the officers of the corporation. It'll show any changes to the address, any changes to the name of the corporation, contact information. There'll also be what's called a registered agent, which is the person who is authorized to get paperwork for that corporation. And that is a key um, identity to know about, because if you ever need to serve documents or give official notice to that corporation, the registered agent is the only one that is official. Even if you brought paperwork to the president of the corporation, they could claim that it wasn't delivered to the correct registered agent. And again, this is a legal question. If you're ever going to want to rely on anything, you want to make sure you get good legal advice from an attorney, qualified attorney. So the registered agent will be something to look for in the corporate records with the Secretary of State. In most states, you can look that up electronically. There's some states where you have to put in a request with paper documents and have them mail it to you. But usually you can get it electronically. So asset searching is a very, very important part of an investigative process to make sure either before a case starts to see, is it worth going ahead with a case? Is it worth going ahead with a lawsuit if the person has no money? Or do you want to know that they have a lot of money and they're going to be able to afford a lot of legal fees to fight your lawsuit, right? And that may be a reason you don't want to do the lawsuit. If they have too much money, they could spend, hundreds of thousands to fight against you, and you might want to know what their financial situation is. The other thing you want to know is what their financial situation is at the beginning of the lawsuit, because if you win the lawsuit at the end and it's different, you can show, well, look, at the beginning of this lawsuit, they had X amount of dollars. Now they have nothing. Where did that money go, right? If you didn't run an asset search at the beginning of the case, you'll never know that they had all that money. And you'll just think, well, I won a lawsuit against a poor person. But if they hid assets during the case, that's something that would be helpful to you when it comes time for recovery. There's a lot of strategy that attorneys use on asset searches. Many attorneys will do a three-pronged approach. Run a asset search before they even file the case. They'll run another one halfway through the case and another one at the case ending to make sure that everything is the same. The reason they'll run one in the middle is because if it's discovered that in the middle of a court case that a debtor or defendant is hiding assets, like they've sold houses, they've put vehicles in different names, they've done a lot of transfers, that information can be brought to the court to show the judge or whoever is handling that court process that maybe there's bad faith going on. And sometimes we've seen attorneys be able to get legal fees for their client when they can show that the other side is doing something that's a little sketchy. So that three-pronged approach is very common. It's not necessary. You can just run one at the end and use that to collect assets. But if you have a track record of what that debtor or other party has been doing, that might be something that could be helpful to a case. The next question, the person asked to remain anonymous. It has to do with recovering deleted data from a mobile device. So let's say you have a cell phone or you have a tablet or some other mobile device, and you want to know what the data is on that phone, right? Even if it's been deleted. One of the things that is a common misconception is when you have a mobile device and you have a message or an email or a text or a picture or something and you hit delete, it does not actually delete that file. What it does is it just takes it off the list of things you can look at, right? So think about it like this. Think about if you walked into a library, which really nobody does anymore, but imagine a library with a bunch of books on the shelf. And you want to find a book and there's a list. You have the card file, you look up the list and you find the book in the shelf. If you said you were deleting that book, one way of deleting it is take the book off the shelf and throw it in the trash. Another way of deleting it would be to just take the card out of the card file and throwing that away so nobody could find the book. The book's still there on the shelf, but it's not really in the index list. Another way of looking at it is if you go to a grocery store and you look at the signs at the end of the aisle, and aisle 3 is spaghetti sauce, right? If you just crossed off spaghetti sauce off that sign, the spaghetti sauce is still on the shelf, but you can't find it because it's not on the list. So on a mobile device, even a computer, a PC or a Chromebook or an pad or any other type of electronic device, when you hit delete, does not actually delete the file. It just takes it off the list of inventory of what you can find. So to recover those files, you can just scan through using special software and sometimes hardware devices. And you can find the files that either have certain words in them that were deleted on a certain date, that maybe even recover all deleted files. Certain voicemail messages, when you delete a voicemail, that's still in your phone, right? Even if the phone has been factory reset, there's a lot of files still there. And the files in most cases are kept in two places. They're usually kept in the cloud for that phone provider, right? So if you have an iPhone, it could be in an Apple Drive. If you have an Android, it could be in your Google Drive. These files are kept in more than one place. So even if the phone device is not available, there are sometimes ways to recover these files. We have a lot of clients come to us wanting to recover documents that are important to them that have been deleted or lost. This also holds true for apps that are deleted. We had a case we worked on a couple weeks ago where a client had a phone that there were messages and photos that were exchanged using an app, a communications app, not the regular text message. It was using like a WhatsApp or something like that. And the app itself had been deleted. And in that case, we were able to recover photos, messages, two sides of a conversation, and all the files that were exchanged recovered for the client. So just because an app is deleted doesn't mean the data is gone. And this holds true even for map data. Sometimes you don't even have to store map locations in your mapping or GPS software, and it'll show you. If you have an Android, I get an email every month that says, here's all the places you went last month. Well, I didn't store any of those places. I didn't, save them or search them or anything. It just shows you where you went during the course of a month. The other day I was driving around and on my phone, I looked up a store, right, that I wanted to go to. I think it was like a Home Depot or something. And when I looked it up on the map, it said, you visited here on such and such a date. Well, that's not because I searched for it then. It's just because I had visited there and I was at that, latitude and longitude geolocation. And it told me I was there months ago. So all this information is available to recover from phones, and it can be used to gather valuable data, whether it's for a court case or some other purpose, asset recovery or fraud case or whatever type of need exists, it can be recovered. So if you do have questions about any of these types of cases, you can use our help desk email that you see on the screen, or visit our website, either the Active Intel website, or you can schedule a consultation through our teleclient website. Looks like we have a couple more questions. One is kind of the same thing for the online scam. We already covered that. So if you're the person to ask that question, you can refer back to the earlier part of the video if you missed it. Another subject that came up during the week from a client had to do with locating a missing person. This was a client who has a relative that they haven't seen in 20, 30 years, and they wanted to find him and find out that they're okay and what their current status was. Finding a missing person is similar to an asset search. You're going to look for what records will identify where that person is. Even if the person's deceased, there's a record of that. But the only time that a person is not able to be located is if they have been homeless for more than about 6 months, 6 or 8 months. If they've been homeless for less than 6 months, they can be located. More than 6 months, it gets a little tricky. In many cases, though, even somebody who's homeless will access certain resources, maybe a shelter, maybe a medical facility, maybe some type of food bank. In those cases, sometimes it creates a record of the location of that person. Sometimes, most people, even if they're not in traditional housing, have a mobile device now, right? And that mobile device will have a record. So it's very much more capable of finding people who are off the grid, so to speak, than it used to be in the past. One of our first cases, 15 years ago, was finding somebody's long lost relative, and it was more difficult then because there were less resources. Now it's much more available to do. So that's a case that came up during the week that the client had a lot of questions on how that works, but most people now leave trails of records of their activities, even if they're trying to not be found, or their lifestyle makes it less likely that they're going to be found. So good. We're coming up on about 30 minutes, which is about how long we like to take for these videos. There's a couple more questions. A lot of it was covered in what we talked about before. One of the subjects we'll talk about in future videos, we'll have to do a corporate fraud. If you're a corporation and you have some type of embezzlement or theft from your company, we'll talk a little more about that. But look at this channel for future live conversations. We're going to do these about once a week, usually on a Wednesday or a Thursday. So keep an eye on the channel for the announcement for next week's live question and answer. You'll probably see that show up on Monday or Tuesday with the time and day for it following in a day or two after that. And of course, in the meantime, if you have questions, you can email help@ActiveIntel. There's a phone number on there as well, or you can schedule a one-on-one video consultation through our website at teleclient.com.